let's just see which way.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, my name is Don Willis. I've been here with Waco for about 8 years. I'm a pilot. Started flying when I was 16 years old. I still fly on a Beechcraft. And so aviation has been a part of my life, my entire life. I was an Air Force officer, and then in industry, I'm just a civil pilot now. What I'm going to do is give you a history of the Waco company. Waco stands for Weaver Aircraft Company. That was an acronym, and it was named after a pilot by the name of Buck Weaver. And yeah.
How do you pronounce that, Waco?
Waco.
Waco,
just like
Waco,
taco.
Waco?
No, like taco.
Waco.
Waco, W-A-C-O, like taco, okay? And Buck Weaver was a World War I instructor pilot, pretty famous in his day. And after the war was over, two young gentlemen that worked for the Curtiss Airplane Company, one was named Clayton Bruckner, and the other was named Sam Junkin. They decided that they wanted to hook up with someone and try to build airplanes, because this aviation thing was just taking off, really, after World War I. So they hooked up with Buck Weaver, and he was well known, and he was trying to make a living barnstorming, which is what a lot of pilots did after World War I. And the three of them formed the company, and since he was the most famous of the three, they called it the Weaver Aircraft Company, and then later shortened that to Waco. So that's where the name came from. The company was originally formed in Lorain, Ohio, which is up by Cleveland. And they built one airplane there called the Cootie, which is the one that you see hanging on the ceiling here behind you. Okay? It was a 26 horsepower engine made entirely out of plywood, barely flew, but Buck Weaver flew it. Turns out he crashed it and had some injuries, but not enough to keep him from flying. And they took the parts and rebuilt it, and then after that, they built biplanes only. The reason he crashed wasn't because of the airplane. He crashed because he took off, and then the fog came in, and he kind of missed the runway when he landed. So that wasn't good. So the company moved here to Troy, and it initially built the Cootie, and then it built the Waco 1, the Waco 2, Waco 3, Waco 4. The Waco 4, this is a Waco 4 right here, and the Waco 4 was, it looks a lot like a World War I Jenny, because the war surplus parts were so cheap that the company bought them up, and then they built their airplanes out of those parts. And so the Waco 4, it has an OX5 engine, which is an 8-cylinder water-cooled engine. You see that big radiator on the front. Yeah. So this is the engine that powered the Jennies in World War I. It's a very powerful engine, and there is a club today called the OX5 Club, and they build and maintain and actually fly these engines in airplanes still today.
How about the Liberty engine?
Liberty engine was much bigger, 257 horsepower. They built an airplane called the Waco 8, which was their attempt at a passenger liner. It could actually carry 8 people. It could carry 6 of them down inside the fuselage, and then the pilot and one passenger sat side by side in an open cockpit up on the top. They only built about 3 of those. They built them, but they couldn't really sell them. And that was their problem. And the reason they couldn't sell them was because the government had dumped the whole World War I surplus onto the market. And so you could buy Jennies and stuff that were really very cheap, and cheaper than anyone could make a new airplane. So their business plan had a flaw in it, until all that war surplus either got crashed or ran out or something like that. By that time, the company had moved down here to Troy, which was its only location, In between about 1920 and 1947, the Waco Aircraft Company built airplanes, and they were here in Troy from about 1924, 25 on, right in that era. They built their last airplane in 1947. The company went on for many more years until it was finally sold in 1962. They sold it to Goodrich. So in the early history, this airplane that you see right here is a Waco 9. That was their first real production hit. They mastered the idea of mass production, assembly line production, with these airplanes, and they had a production run of 350 Waco 9s. We have a very famous Waco 9 back here. This blue aircraft is the Waco 9. You can see it looks a lot different than the Waco 4. It's still that OX5 engine. They were still using them out of the warehouse, but notice the radiator's not in the front. They moved the radiator up under the wing to make it much simpler and easier to build. They didn't have to have a radiator with a crankshaft coming through the middle of it. That made it complicated. They also, in this one you see it's all fabric, so they've gotten rid of the wood, so that takes weight out. They streamline the nose to make it go faster. And that airplane was certified to carry 3 people, 2 in the front and 1 in the back, and all Wacos are certified like that, to carry 3 people, not 2, even though they have 2 cockpits. This will give you a picture here of the early factories. They called the company, they reorganized several times. They called their second company the Advanced Aircraft Company, but they still called the airplanes Wacos because it was such a popular term. They were enough marketing people to know, well, we won't change that name because everybody knows us by that name. And the early factories were scattered all around town. They built the wings in one place, they built the fuselage in another place, they had the engines in another place, and then they took them out to this barn on the river. You see the barn there in the picture, and that was where they'd assemble it, put it together, put oil and gas in it, fire up the engine, and fly it off of the place downtown, which is now where the Hobart Arena and the football stadium is. That was the original, it's called Dokes Field. That was the original Waco field. It really was just a hayfield. Later on, the company began to get more successful, and what they would do, Clayton was thinking, okay, we really need to build a single dedicated factory to get our production thing going. The people of Troy raised money to make a loan to the Waco company to keep that factory here. And that factory still exists. It's about 2.5 miles from here, and it's the place now that Goodrich bought it, and now Goodrich has been bought by United Technologies. So in that Waco factory today, UTC has their aerospace operations, and they build aircraft wheels and brakes for like 747s and fighter airplanes, things like that. In the early days, there weren't a lot of FAA regulations. The pilots who had just come into town, they'd take a few flying lessons, and as soon as they were able to take off and land successfully a few times, Clayton got the money, and it was their airplane. And his rule was, if you made it over the fence, it was your responsibility. That would never go today, but in the early days, that was it. And I don't know, some of them didn't make it home. They landed in a field or something. Here's a picture of one of the factories where they're making wings. This is when the factories were all separated. And it was basically wooden construction on the wings. They would use spruce. Then they would take and sew the wing fabric just like a sock and pull it in over the wing until it was tight, and then they would dope it with this stuff that would shrink it and make it tight, so it's just like a drum if you went up and hit it with your finger. Now if you poked hard, you could poke a hole right through it. So it's basically fabric. But it made it waterproof and it shrunk it. On this one, you can see the early workers here were a really high-tech group. They basically were welders, farmers, because farmers knew how to work with wood and do anything. And a lot of the, Clayton was a very cheap manager, so a lot of his people were part-time people, and they would be farmers, and then when he'd get orders, well, they'd come in and work in the factory, make a little extra money, and go home, and that's the way it was in the early days. He didn't believe in paying people to stand around, so. And a lot of them came from the wagon-making industry, because in wagons you had wood and you had the steel and everything, and so people knew how to join wood and steel, and that was a skill that they needed for those early airplanes. Here are some of the test pilots. You see these guys are, what a crew there. This must have been in the winter, because they're dressed, it is cold when you get up at altitude. And you can also see there's a couple of cigarettes there on the flight line. That also would not be allowed today, smoking out on the flight line. So, this was a picture of a Waco 9. You can see how pretty it was compared to some of those clunky old World War I Jennies. It was very popular. Waco did a lot of other things too that were very unique. And one of them was they pioneered what I'm going to call the executive aircraft. They built these cabin aircraft, appointed them very nicely, and they sold these Wacos all around the world. They had an export business that went to 46 different countries. They sold them all around the world to the CEOs of these companies, who would use them to go around and inspect their operations and visit their different factories and everything like that. It was a big status symbol. For a company to have an aircraft, still is today, have an aircraft and a pilot and everything to, to fly the boss around. Now the other part of the Waco story, in World War II, the Waco made the CG-4A glider. This is the glider that was used in Normandy, it's almost like there are two company histories. One building airplanes up until the war, and then when the war started, Waco did not get an aircraft contract. They got this glider contract. So when they came out of World War II, it was pretty much the end, because the people who were building the fighters and the bombers, which is Grumman and North American and Lockheed and all those companies, they were far, far ahead. And all Waco had was the rag and tube kind of construction that they had going into the war. Now the glider was a very, very capable aircraft, but it didn't have engines. It didn't have the sophisticated controls. It basically was a disposable aircraft. And so Waco really lost out in the technology race in World War II. They made one attempt to get back into the general aviation industry after World War II with a pusher type airplane. It was not successful, and after that Clayton said, okay, we're not going to build airplanes anymore. So they went from being the largest aircraft producer in the world in the late 1920s, early 1930s, to being out of business in the airplane business in 1947. Wow. Yeah, question?
A few years back, I read an article where there was, I don't know, it was a company or a group of guys, but they were building Waco airplanes.
Yes, there is a company called Waco Classic, and they bought the rights to the Waco YMF-5, and they build those. You can buy a brand new Waco today from Waco Classic, and it's actually prettier than the original. Yeah. It'll cost you about $250,000 though, because it's handmade. That's a YMF-5, the red one that you see doing rides. So that's a new airplane, even though it's a design from the 30s. It is a new aircraft. That airplane, I think, was built about 2002,
Okay.
so it's not very old. Waco was an aviation pioneer, did an awful lot of things. They are the ones that really kind of pioneered what I'm going to call mass production or assembly line production of airplanes. They built the Waco 8 airliner very early, 1924, carried 8 passengers. One of their pilots, Fearless Freddie Lund is what he was called, first guy to do an outside loop, which is basically where you start the loop on top and you go down under, and that takes a strong aircraft and a strong pilot to do that. Now, some things you don't know: the first aircraft to shoot down a Japanese aircraft in World War II was a Waco. It was a Chinese Waco that Waco had sold to the Chinese Army, who was trying to get their Air Force started. And what they would do is take an open cockpit airplane and they would remove the seats and put basically a machine gun up in the front cockpit. And that was their version. In a lot of countries, I'm going to call them second level countries, like Ecuador and Central America, they would buy these Wacos, and that was their Air Force right up through the World War II time period. So Waco did build military aircraft, they just never sold it to our government. They would sell them overseas. Wacos were used in early crop dusting. I told you about the executive aircraft. They had a thing called a throw-over yoke, which is they still use today on Beechcraft. My aircraft has a throw-over yoke where you can take the yoke from one side and put it over to the other side, so you can fly from the right seat or the left seat, but there's really only one wheel. That was a Waco design. They also were the first aircraft to be used in special ops, like the CIA spies. And this was a group in World War II down in North Africa. There were Australians and New Zealanders. When Rommel was down there, there was actually a TV show called Rat Patrol, which was about these guys. And they needed a way to insert their people back behind the lines at night, because what they do is they put these guys back there and they'd cause all kinds of havoc and blow things up, and then they'd try to get them out. Well, they went to the Royal Air Force because they were New Zealanders and Australians, and the Royal Air Force did not want to have anything to do with these guys. They were pretty much like a militia and fighting on their own, and so they would not give them any of their airplanes. So what the resourceful people, Rat Patrol, did is they went to Cairo, Egypt, and they bought a couple of Wacos from a produce company. That these are cabin Wacos that had been, and they used those in their black ops. They would, at night, they would take off and they'd land these things out in the middle of the desert behind Rommel's lines, drop their people off, they would do their stuff, and the next night they'd fly back in, pick them up, and get them out of there. And there is a Air Force base down in Florida which is dedicated, there's a museum there dedicated to secret air operations. And if you go down there, they have a history, and the first airplane that ever was employed in that was a Waco cabin aircraft. And then you see this picture on the left, they were the first hang glider guys. They built an early glider. It was just to train people. You see that man sitting in it. He's sitting out in the open, just pretty much like a hang glider. You hook that up to your Model A and run it down through the field, and when it gets to about 20 miles an hour, that thing will lift off, and it's stick and rudder, and you can fly it. You can also release the cable, and you'll fly until you run out of airspeed and land. And we have one of those gliders hanging over in the other hangar. If you look up there, you'll see it. And I've often thought it'd be fun to fly that myself, but I probably will never do it. Okay, I'll give you a few things. That's kind of the history of Waco, the company. I'll tell you a few things about this organization, which is the Waco Historical Society. It was formed here in Troy by Oh, some of the ex-employees, but they were pretty old. It's mostly the sons and daughters and you know, nephews of the people that worked in the Waco company to try and preserve this history. We have in our organization 3 goals. One is historical preservation. The other one is education. We run a very large learning center activity here. We touch around 12 to 1,400 students every year in some kind of activities, education. And then the third is community service. Events like what you're having here with the Scout Show are things that we like to put on for the community. This building here is used for all kinds of things. We had a wedding in here not last week. We will, and it was a pilot, of course, would have to be, right? Yeah. To get married in a hangar. And his wife better get used to it, because that's the way it's going to be. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we have a board of directors and 15 trustees. We've been really operating here since 1978. We've been on this site since 1997, and the building you're sitting in here was built only about 4 or 5 years ago, so it's pretty new.
It had nothing to do with the Waco company.
Well, it was not a part of the, technically and legally, it's not part of the Waco company. Yeah, it was formed in 1987, and the Waco company went out of business in 1962. So there's a gap in there where there was no official Waco. Here you see our grand opening. The red barn, I'll give you a picture of that. That is a pre-Civil War barn. Was originally located about 1.5 miles from here, and when they built the highway through, they had to move the barn, so we got it, and they took it all apart. We have a large German Baptist community around here, so there are people who really know how to build these old barns, and we had an old-fashioned barn raising. You can see all the people who put that barn up. And then we put the skin on it, put the roof on it, and you have what you have today.
It almost looks like a movie.
Yeah, well, you see that little Christmas tree on the top there? That's a symbol of good luck if you know about this kind of a thing. Then we built the steel hangar, the one that's next door to us here. That was built on a shoestring here. Bruns Construction, who is up the road here, helped us with that. And then you see the new hangar in that picture that's on the upper left, and the facilities that we have today. We got many more airplanes in here once we got this nice hangar, and we were able to kind of climate control it and things like that. And you can see the corporate functions when people are using this thing. We've had banquets in here for as many as 100 people, catered in the back and everything. It's quite a unique venue, and it's unique to Troy, so people like to use it for their special events. This is a lot of stuff I'm going to just skip over here. We have become a regional attraction. We had over 1,400 just walk-in visitors to our museum last year. This year I think we'll actually top 3,000 because we got some brown signs down on the freeway, and that's bringing in a lot of people who like, oh gee, I wonder what that is. And if they understand or know anything about the aircraft, they get it, and they'll bring them in. Our events will add an additional 8,000 people every year. Your event is getting pretty big. It's almost as big as our fly-in event now. The museum itself is growing in terms of, we're about out of room, time to build another building. We have 525 dues-paying members. The dues are $30 a year, and our members are everywhere. They're all over the world because these Wacos are all over the world, and you're in a club, the Scout Club International. You know how when people get onto a product like this, they will do anything to get there, and that's what these people are. Talked about the Learning Center. We also have some corporate members here in town. United Technology Center is one. Hartzell Propeller is one. And we have a lot of facility events here, and that's growing. And here is the building we're in now. This is our learning center. I'll just show you, we have something for everybody. If you look at the Learning Center program, preschool, we have book readings. For middle school, we have elementaries. We have 600 or 700 kids that will come through here, and we'll give them workshops. We have 4 robotics teams in the middle school, and we do a radio-controlled aircraft workshop and a rocket workshop. We have an aviation summer camp, which is a week-long day camp for kids to come and they fly and do things. High school, we started a aerospace occupations VOTEC course up in Piqua, the town just north of us here at our Miami County VOTEC school. And we have a FTC robotics team, which just broke all records last year. They won the state of Ohio, then they won their region, then they won their district, then they went to the world meet, and they came in 25th in the world out of about 5,000 different teams. So really great, great for the kids. They are now taking their little robot, and they have become teachers. They're taking that robot and going out to libraries and doing demonstrations and stuff. So if you really want to see, a program make a difference, and those kids will never be the same the rest of their life because of that participation in that. We have a Civil Air Patrol group here, and we do a scout camporee. We have the Young Eagle program that flies out of here once a year. We do adult lectures, and we just started a teacher training program where we will train middle school teachers how to teach science projects using what I call lesson in a tub. And it's around some kind of hands-on project. We have a teacher come in from NASA, Glenn, up in Cleveland, that teaches the teachers how to do these science projects in elementary school. I'm just going to show you some pictures here. These are the guys up in the VOTEC school. We bought all this equipment and set this thing up for them. There they are working on the airplane, and got them an airplane. They actually have 2 airplanes now. Here's our home school. We not only go to, in our school outreach, we not only go out to the, I'm going to call it the organized schools, the county schools, city schools, we go to homeschool groups. We have them come in here too. And here's our NASA teachers training course. We have now taught about 150 teachers how to have been through this course in the last couple of years. There's our adult lecture. This guy's name is Jack Meacham. He was a special ops helicopter pilot in Vietnam. The guys like to insert SEAL Team 6. That's the squadron he flew in. So I'll go through some of this. This is kind of my last slide. We have a lot of ways that people can join. You can be a board member, a volunteer. You can become a restorer. We have members that are working on restoring. There's probably 5 or 6 airplanes under construction in the vicinity here. Some have been under construction for a long time, and some will be ready this year too. You can be a supporter with dollars, help in our Learning Center program, be a historian, a barnstormer with our radio-controlled aircraft club, are called the Barnstormers. They fly the field here too. Or become a cadet or a student intern. We try to work with the youth all the time here. So that's pretty much the Waco story, the way it was and the way it is now. And I like to say that, you know, Waco was a very important part of this community when it was a company. Economically, during the Depression, it kind of held the whole region together. We're trying to remain a very important part of the community. We preserve history, but we don't just rely on it. We're trying to do things in our community and keep people active and everything today. And your event's a great example of that kind of thing.
You know, when I was a kid, An airplane would fly overhead and stop and look at it.
Stop every time, yeah. I still do that.
And you have nowadays, I fly model airplanes.
Yeah,
And we fly off, you know, and people don't even look at them. They're in their computer,
Yeah.
iPad, or whatever they got.
well, I got mine, but if I hear a round engine, I'll stop and look.
That's what I'm saying is that, I don't know, people
Yeah.
aren't interested in these.
Yeah.
There are.
Well, the nice thing about our Learning Center program is it's all hands-on. The kids will build rockets, or they will build airplanes, or they will build gliders, and then they will go fly them and say, okay, did that work? Well, no. Okay, so come on back, figure out what you did wrong, and improve it, and then try again. And they kind of pick up the scientific process, the engineering part of it, and you know, that's the way you have to solve problems. And a lot of these kids now have gone on into college, and some of them into technical careers, and so I'm you know, I think we maybe had a role to play in that. You never know, for sure. So, okay, that completes my lecture. So I'll hang around here for a few minutes. If you have any questions, let me know.